actually, let me preempt a little bit of this. This collection of slides, i.e. talk, is about, it's kind of like not science. It's about the act of doing science and the issues therein. And I guess the caveat perhaps is uh, maybe data scientists, it's a little different. So how to be an academic data scientist would have issues that are not covered here. So think about this as we go through, and please let me know what you think. Before I even get started, so on the Slack channel, I put this Slido link. Slido is some website where you can submit anonymous comments. So obviously you can type in the Slack channel, but we know who you are. But if you would like to say something, comment, ask a question anonymously, I think it's very useful. So just go there, click on the link, or use your phone or something on this QR code. It should work. And if someone could actually test it out, that would be great. Then you can say something anonymously and we can discuss. And I'll keep this open while I'm giving you my spiel so I can monitor what's happening. Of course, you can also interrupt me. It might be hard because I can't tell. I'm not even sure I can see a hand, but maybe RL or Noah, you can manage this. Um,
No.
okay, yeah. And also anyone, and not just students, any postdocs or faculty or Noah, Ariel, feel free to interrupt me also and let's make this more of a discussion, hopefully. All right, so the genesis of this slide deck is just, I guess, over the years, these are just thoughts that arise when I interact with people, collaborators, students, postdocs, and I just over the years sort of cobbled together these thoughts. And it kind of addresses the following question: to be a good scientist, you should do what? And the answer to this is not about the actual topic, well, what skills or what programming analysis. It's just like how do you be a scientist? What do you do in your daily life, your monthly life, your yearly life? And a lot of this is learned implicitly. Like you have to go through years of being a grad student, years of being a postdoc, years of being a faculty, and then eventually you like figure it out. And so it's this kind of wizard model. Eventually you become this old wizard. And then I thought, I guess, well, instead of spending 30 years to become a wizard, you can learn some of this just by talking or listening to this talk, hopefully, and just learn just by someone explicitly talking, spelling it out. And another caveat here is like this is just there's a huge style variation in how you be a scientist, and I don't want to say there's only one way. What I'm trying to get across here, I think, is sort of commonalities that I see out there. It may also be, for the record, like culturally specific. So this is maybe a US centric mindset, and like, there will be some style variations if you come from a different country or institution for that matter. But I'll try to focus on things most people will agree with. This slide deck is available here if you want to get this QR code. I can also post the slide file on the Slack channel. Someone likes my mustache. Okay, great. Okay, so I guess one of the main points I want to get across here that if you're going to be an academic scientist, for better or worse, is really all about the people. And maybe a point of contrast here is like if you're in more of an applied setting, so industry, or you're building a product, or if you're a pure software programmer, I suppose you will have a boss. But like in those contexts, you build something and it works, or people buy it. And so yeah, the consumers are people, let's say, but you're pretty divorced from the consumers, unless you're in like sales or something. But in science, I think, or academic science, it's really about people. And I guess a few related points. You probably some of this, yeah, okay. For the really newcomers, like maybe some of this is new, and for people who have years of experience already, like I'm not saying anything that you don't already know, but science, at least as we currently conduct it, has a very particular structure. So in terms of what we do, we write papers, we get peer reviews, we go to conferences, you go to summer camps, you land a postdoc, you apply for jobs. Like there's this whole structure to what we do. And you don't know this early on, right? You often learn by doing, and you spend years doing it. Another observation, and I'm going to hook it to the people point here with this point. I mean, just the very fact that you guys are at a summer camp, I mean, you're surrounded by 30, 40, 50 other people, right? And not everyone is super extroverted. Some people are introverts, and this may be more or less difficult depending on your kind of personality type. And the thing we're doing, so data science or studying the brain or using neuroimaging techniques, I mean, it's very technical stuff. And like often you're sitting there coding by yourself. Of course, this may vary. And in some sense, it's a very introverted activity. But when you promote your science, when you distribute your data, distribute your code, give talks, things like that, that's, you're talking to people ultimately, right? So having people skills, I guess, is part of the endeavor. And not only that, you learn from your colleagues, you learn from your mentor, if you get older, you start teaching younger people, undergrads, master students. You might find yourself collaborating heavily. That's a people-oriented activity. You get your papers reviewed. Of course, it's pretty anonymized and depersonalized, but ultimately the person writing the review of your paper is a person, although that may be changing with AI nowadays, but hopefully not. So it's really all about people, right? I'm talking to people right now, I think, or I'm talking to a Zoom square. And eventually, and this we'll touch on some career stuff, like when you get hired for a postdoc, if you do continue with this, or for a faculty job. I mean, these are all people decisions. And yeah, so this theme will come up in subsequent slides about the importance of people and how you interact with people. And lastly, and this kind of is a contrast with, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of industry point. So at least if you're writing like pure basic science papers, we're not really making objects. We're making knowledge, and knowledge is digested, at least traditionally, by humans, although AI is now digesting the internet and papers. But I guess the point here, to use kind of an idiom, if you don't communicate your research well and or excite people and explain why it's important, like, does it actually matter? You could do the greatest data set, greatest analysis, and if no one knows about it, arguably it doesn't really matter. Of course, 100 years from now, assuming your paper exists in some digital form, maybe someone will appreciate it. But if you care about the here and now, eh, you need the people around you to understand it and hopefully get excited by what you're doing. Okay, it's very hard talking to the Zoom void, so I'm going to pause for a second and just see if there's comments. Probably not that many comments yet, but I just want to pause for a second and see if there's any reactions.
If anyone has comments, I've got a microphone, so.
I'm doing amazing. All right, thanks. So there's a person, well, I don't know if that's a person. It could be a bot. Yeah, AI is a whole nother discussion. I assume you guys are having discussions about AI as tools and about changing society. Okay, let's not go there. Okay, what is it we're doing as an endeavor? I think we're all trying to do good science. So let's define at least one view of what good science is. I break it down into the three following questions. Is what you're doing interesting? Is it valid or true? So if you're talking about a claim about the world, about the brain, it's presumably based on data. And so it's about the validity of your data and your analyses. So is it interesting? Is it actually true? And hearkening to the point I just made, is it expressed clearly? Did you communicate it well to the humans who are reading your papers, for example? Um, that's how I view it, at least. And here's a tongue-in-cheek diagram of it's kind of reverse of that. So you don't want to be in these circles. So is what you're doing wrong? Hopefully not. Is it boring? Hopefully not. And is it incoherent? Hopefully not. And you might imagine any sort of mixture of these three things. You might imagine something that's super interesting, but just is wrong, right? The topic is super interesting, but it's just making a wrong claim about the world. You might imagine, the greatest science and there's a, truth behind it, but just like no one can understand it because the writing and conveyance of the information is just poor. Um, anyway, so you might imagine all sorts of combinations of these three things. Okay. One of the dilemmas here, though, is it's the tension between the first 2 points, basically. So we all want to study super interesting things, but presumably the super interesting things are really hard to make progress on. So there's this tension or trade-off between the interesting topics and the topics we can actually make progress on understanding. So I have this diagram here. I'll just briefly go through it. These are all schematics. Hopefully that's clear. Where the x-axis is kind of the degree to which you can make progress on the question you're interested in. So to the right is like, I can answer the question really well. And the y-axis is how important is the thing that you even set out to study. And this is super subjective, of course, and it will depend on who your audience is, what field you're in, what measurement method often is a way of dividing the field up. So yeah, very subjective, of course, but take it for what it is. Now, of course, we want to be in the upper right. We want to be answering really important questions, and we want to be answering those questions really, really rigorously. But that's the ideal. And in practice, we may be stuck in certain suboptimal parts of this quadrant. For example, down here, we could be answering something really, really rigorously and well. We can have the greatest data and the best data, the most amount of data, but maybe fundamentally the stuff we're saying, the topic is just not that interesting. And then conversely over here, we could be setting out to study a really important question, but like since it's so hard and amorphous, let's say consciousness, we might not be making much progress at all on actually understanding that thing. Or another example, clinical. Clinical applications, presumably we all agree, are really, really important, but also notoriously hard to have, you know, practical, brain health solutions. Um, One more point I just want to mention, and I should pace myself here, is if you're a trainee, you may start off at the lower left, right? You don't know much, you're not even sure about the right questions to ask, and then over time you may progress towards the upper right. You start getting a sense of what questions are important. This involves developing theories of brains, theories of what people do mentally, psychology, all sorts of theoretical background. And at the same time, you can also progress in your skill set in terms of how you measure brains, how you analyze data, how you build tools, things like that. Again, please feel free to stop me or type stuff in the chat. Science communication. This was my NeuroHack thing last year. I guess they're all recorded. In theory, you could go watch it. But that's not what I'm talking about today, or rather the importance of communication, but I'm not really addressing how you do that communication. Okay, moving on. This slide, again, for those who've been doing it, this is all obvious, but for those new, it's maybe worth spelling out. So what concretely, in terms of external measures of success, are you searching to optimize for as a scientist, as an academic scientist? So number one, like number zero, really, the most important is write primary research articles, get published in reasonable journals. Close second is getting grants. So this is at least probably more of your later stages of your career where you're a postdoc or a faculty. You need to convince people that you have good ideas and that you're worth investing in so that you can pursue those ideas. Other things, what does success look like? This is kind of the people note. People need to know about your work. People need to be excited by what you do, and that shows up as in terms of getting invited to give talks or giving talks at conferences. Often conferences are competitive, and so you write an interesting abstract, and there's an abstract selection committee, and they might designate you for an oral presentation. Just being known in your field. Again, harping on the people aspect. People have to know who you are, the research you do, and hopefully that you're known for a good reason. Um, so on and so forth. And it is a long journey. Most of you are probably here. Some of you had a formal RA or lab manager type position probably for a year or two. And then postdocing can easily go on for 3, 4, 5, even 6 years, multiple postdocs possibly sometimes. And yeah, so it's a long, you're in it for the long haul if you like this stuff. One thing that I'm not mentioning here, and it's very hard to quantify or say much about, although I'm curious about, I mean, you could you guys could type in the Slido how you feel about this. But none of this is about what you actually get out of your doing what you do. So if you're Noah, you love the program, right? And maybe you get immense personal satisfaction just, being able to develop like a solution, a code solution to some problem. Like if that's what makes you happy, like great. So hopefully you get to do that while at the same time publishing papers and like the external measures of success. This point is very subjective. Like maybe not everyone likes to code. Maybe people like to whatever. Maybe you like to mentor people or you like to create stimuli or whatever it is you like. I mean that's really important, but it's not your external measure of success here. Okay, let me stop to answer a question that I think I saw. I'll just read it. What are your thoughts on having tension between the trainee and the PI regarding the exciting versus answerable? Great question. I mean, I have no solution to that. But it does un underline or highlight the people point, right? When you start out, at least, you have a mentor or advisor. If you're a PhD student, you have a lab that you're in, the person who hopefully is helping you through this process. And yeah, that's two people at least, and they may have differing opinions on basically what project to pursue. Should we pursue a project that's more interesting and exciting but high risk versus a more tractable project that's a little boring but at least answerable? My guess is, well, it might happen both ways, right? The PI might want the more risky project. I can totally imagine certain PIs who want that. And I might imagine other way around, the student might want to shoot big, like super impactful work, but the PI might be more conservative and say like, hey, we just got to learn the ropes and like make sure we can do the basic experiment before we can do the more advanced ones. So your mileage may vary depending on the people you're surrounded by. Next question, how do you reconcile oh yeah, same question. Yeah, so one common model alluded to by this comment, who was submitted by Anonymous, it's often the case that the PI wants to write the big swishy paper, even though the results don't support it. I'm not saying that's the right way to go, but it's very common that that happens. Uh, yeah, that's between you and your PI. I mean, it's sort of a sticky point here, right? Because I guess we're in ethics. So how do you be an ethical PI? How do you work well with your uh, advisor? I don't know. In some cases, it reaches the point of like irreconcilable differences, and this becomes a thing in the PhD program, and like you switch labs, like that definitely happens. So it's not crazy that this might happen. Hopefully, it never reaches that level. But I guess the ideal is you have someone you can work with, and maybe the ship has already sailed on that if you're already in a program. But if you're pre-grad school, I mean, this is your chance to, through interviews and talking to people in the lab and talking to the PI directly, just try and understand if you can work with this human. Thanks for submitting that question, whoever that was, and keep them coming. Okay, science is hard. Hopefully, all of you already know this. Here's my view on, and so the meta comment here is why I'm giving you these slides is if you stop to think about how do you optimize, I mean, it's very like robotic actually. Like I want to be the best scientist I can be. What do I need to do that? And so this slide is in that mold. Okay, so how do you do good science, or like what do you need? This is my view. First, you need like basic abilities and the knowledge, the background knowledge, the skills, whether that's writing, programming, statistics, analysis. Okay, so you need to build this knowledge and skill base, and that's pretty obvious. The challenge though is, and don't bother to read all of these terms. I actually made this for a different use, but there's a ton of things we need to know. Like not every project needs everything, and like it depends on the subfield of neuroscience or neuroimaging. Like for example, I don't know anything about biology, like biological techniques, but that's okay because that's not the flavor of neuroscience I do. But I guess the challenge is there's a lot, and hopefully you are aware of this, and like being at NeuroHackademy, there's a lot of just like in the data science realm, there's a lot to learn. So that's the dilemma. And so I think the corollary here, which gets a little more practical, is you have to make a deliberate, or you ideally make a deliberate decision as to what to master and what to merely be competent in, because time is limited, basically. So ideally, you think about this and you decide at some point that you will become an expert in X and that you are competent in Y. So you need knowledge in this skill set, which takes years. I will say, like, it took me 4 years as a grad student to actually know stuff at a sufficient level to actually do science. So it took me a while. And you need time, which translates in well, time to execute stuff. And in science, I think the unique challenge is stuff moves very, very slowly because the projects we often do are very, very complex and or take a long time. So if it's a data collection project, data collection could easily take years. If it's a deep investigation of some complicated phenomena, you might need to run multiple experiments. So projects are very long, they're very complex, and they require a lot of like endurance. So science is in some sense a marathon. Also endurance in the paper writing process. Writing good papers takes a long time. The paper review process can take months, if not years, if you count revisions, and hopefully you don't get it, but rejections and resubmission. You could argue that's a broken system. That's a whole nother topic. But in its current form, the paper review process can easily extend years. Okay. And I don't know, this is maybe me editorializing. There's not much solution other than you just have to do it. And this maybe speaks to kind of the personal, like, what do you get out of do science? Do you really want to run this marathon? Well, some people like running marathons. I guess I like running marathons. Noah, you probably do. Um, and as a trainee or someone growing up in science, it may take you a couple years to kind of see, is this for you? And many of you won't get pursue academic science in the long term, but you know, you have time and you have time to figure this out for yourself. Okay, let me pause there for a second and see if there's any comments. And Noah, maybe you can help field.
I think you actually passed there's a comment that scrolled off, or a question.
Um, do you have any advice for imposter syndrome? Oh yeah, great one. I think that's coming on one of my diagrams. So let me revisit when I show you the diagram. Anything else?
I think you're good to go.
Okay. So on the topic of time, so I just got done saying projects take a long time, and that's hard as a human endeavor, right? Like you can spend 8 hours a day working on something, but if someone tells you, well, oop, you got to do this, 300 days a year, how do you actually structure your own psyche and your time? So time management. So I say here, like, if your goal is like be a good scientist and write papers and give talks and grants, like in the end, this is a sustained activity and it's about productivity. And it maybe trivializes it to count papers, but let's just use that metaphor. Like, how many papers can you churn out? Let's say a quote easy way to churn out more papers is to just increase your time. But I'm putting that in quotes because we have limits. Like you can only, you need your sleep. You shouldn't be skimping on your sleep, right? Like you probably heard this, like you should get the sleep that your body needs. And so you really can't increase effort or time indefinitely. Okay. But I mean, in theory, you could, right? Well, if you find yourself, working 2 hours a day, you should probably increase that number. Okay. That's an easy way to increase productivity. Okay. But in the absence of inflating that to infinity, we're stuck with the dilemma, which is we have limited time. So what do we do? Well, the basic story is develop self-knowledge. Like you need to understand what's bottlenecking you. And again, projects are complicated. It could be anything. It could be, data collection is taking forever, or there's problems in data collection, or your coding skills aren't super great yet. So it's taking you a long time to kind of go back and forth and revise the piece of code. So that would suggest like you need to just spend time developing coding skills or whatever. There's all sorts of bottlenecks. Another one, perhaps obvious, is like if time is limited, it's a limited resource, just allocate accordingly. So an expression I often say a lot. I'm sure Noah, you've heard me say it, is don't get caught in the weeds. Like data is complex. There's lots of aspects of the data. You could optimize this one part of the data collection or pre-processing, and it could be important, but it might not actually be that important. Like you need to, step back often and like think about like how does this contribute to the larger project? Like, is this that important? And it obviously you have to do it on a case by case basis. I'm not saying like gloss over everything, but choose your battles would be kind of the short version. Paper writing for many is really arduous and annoying, and some people hide from it. But papers don't write themselves, of course, nowadays with AI tools. And I don't want to go, okay, I can't stop but commenting on it. But yes, AI tools can facilitate. So use it appropriately could be one solution. And workflows. So as you do your project, you will be entering different types of workflows. So let me just list them. You could be in data, if you're an experimentalist and doing data collection, yeah, to do it well takes a lot of mental energy, a lot of juggling many things. You could be in like data collection mindset, and if you're collecting large data set, this may take months, right? So just thinking structure. Uh, I guess one point here is like you want to be efficient. So it's at least for me, I find it very hard to task switch. So if I'm in data collection mode, I can't really be spending a lot of time just like writing code or writing papers. So that would be like analysis workflow. So if your goal right now is take the existing data and develop analysis, like probably the most efficient thing to do is like focus on that. And so that means like whatever, set up your IDE, your coding environment, and like stop doing email, or to the extent possible, like don't set up meetings. Meetings take time, right? And break your workflow. And finally, just writing. So writing's a whole nother discussion on how to do that. And writing is a marathon in and of itself, and how to structure that. Anyway, so know yourself and know like how what makes you tick, and like what times of day you're most effective, and like block out time, and then like just monitor how productive you are, and hopefully that'll increase your productivity. Um, let me skip on to this diagram. I think this is really important, so that's why I'm going to skip to it. And this applies to almost anything we do. So there's this effort versus payoff, or time, effort, payoff. Yeah, let's talk about effort. Effort slash time. So the amount of time you spent dealing with some sort of problem is the x-axis, and the y-axis is payoff. And obviously these are very abstract. But let's make this a little more concrete with, let's say we're talking about analyzing some messy data, right? So there's many different ways to analyze a complex data set. You could develop more advanced methods. You could use simple methods. You could, play with your selection of subjects or voxels, or you could go explore some other completely different technique or toolbox. Anyway, that all takes time and effort. And the general point is you basically get diminishing returns after a while. Actually, there's 2 points to this curve. Let me comment on both. So it's a sigmoid. Okay, not surprisingly. So the initial part of the curve is this kind of slowly accelerating. So it starts off slow, but then accelerates, right? So there's this rising. So you can think of this as your task switching costs. So every time you open up some piece of code that you've been developing, it's going to take you 20 minutes to kind of remember what was your architecture strategy, what were your variable names, what were you trying to do. That takes, half an hour or even an hour to really get in the groove, right? So once you're in the groove, then you can sustain like productivity. You can revise the code, develop new code, over the course of an hour or two, and like you will be pretty productive. Anyway, that's the first part of the curve, kind of overhead switching costs. But the second part of the curve, or well, there's the flat part, I suppose, and then the third part of the curve is also important. It's the compressive part. So it's like the longer you spend on this, you're actually not improving it that much, and you're almost like an expression is spinning your wheels. So you could be staring at the same data set week after week, trying some tweak to the analysis, and like fundamentally, you're not really getting new answers, let's say. And so I guess the action item here, or the thing to take away from this, is be aware of that. right? Like if you have limited time, like you probably shouldn't be spinning your wheels for another 3 weeks. And you should maybe stop that activity. Maybe it's not perfect yet, but it's probably, as close as it's going to get, right? And sort of allocate your time and energy elsewhere. And so I think this curve applies to pretty much any like long sustained activity that we do as scientists. And so when and furthermore, once you realize this, and once you have some experience doing all sorts of different activities, whether it's coding or writing or developing theories or whatever, um, you basically forecast what things are going to be. So, okay, for example, if you start, suppose you have a student or you're a student and you're going to start on a new project, you might have 10 possible different projects. And so if you have enough experience doing this type of stuff, you might already be making predictions of the effort versus payoff curve for each of these 10 different projects. So before you actually even do any practical or concrete work, I would say it's a good idea to spend hours debating like how are these things going to go? What is the how much effort is it going to be? How plausible is it going to work? Right? And in some sense, this is the grant writing process or fellowship writing process. Just that's more formalized. But even if you're just working with yourself and just debating which of 3 or 4 or 5 projects to do, this should be a very calculated decision as to how likely is it going to work and how much effort is it going to take. And one last thing, and then I think I see some comments. There's a big error bar, however, on this, right? I said forecast. Of course, we could be completely wrong in our estimates. So, you might think, oh, this will take like a day, and then it turns out 2 months later that you're still not done. So that's super common. With experience and with metacognition developing for yourself, you should be gaining better and better predictions for your own capacities. So like writing a conference abstract. The first time you do it, it may take 2 weeks to get a product that's actually reasonable. Over time, you get better, and you also get better in your estimate of how long it will take you. Um, hopefully, but I do agree that like if we had full information, of course, we would choose of the 10 projects the one that has the highest payoff for the minimal effort. Of course, we don't necessarily know that with full precision, so it is a guessing game to some extent. That being said, one remedy is ask someone for advice, right? Like someone who has experience doing this type of project or experience training students to do similar things. Like they will have a better sense of, the time and effort and plausibility of any given project. So use that to your advantage. Okay, I will pause to read some questions and also feel free to speak up. Multitasking. Ah, reminding me about this question. I have a whole section on collaborations at the end of this little. So I guess my talk is in 2 halves, but I'm dedicating a whole half to collaborations. Um, so let's revisit that when I get there. And if I forget to get there, just bug me or tell me. Data versus analysis versus writing. Data collection. It's so hard to say in general. Like the proportions could change wildly depending on the type of project that we're talking about. At least is my opinion. Um, hope. Okay, I will say maybe writing is at least a third of the total number of months spent on some project. I'm just making up that number. Um, okay, great. So yeah, remind me about. Um, I keep putting off some of these questions, but please remind me. Okay, this slide's about not. It's actually about very long-term time management. It's kind of like if you're doing this for the long haul, 5, 10, 15 years, one thing to think about at a slow rate, of course, since it's a 10-year process, is essentially what type of scientist you want to be or designing your own career. And so one of the benefits of doing academic or being in academic science is freedom. Like and you hear this, right? But in my mind, that means you essentially get to do what you want within the structure of like writing papers, of course, and like teaching and whatever. But beyond that, you get to design your own career, which is cool if you like freedom. Some people don't like freedom. But okay, so one axis there is, and this maybe is a hard choice, so maybe it's not very fun, but you get to decide the how you design your site. So one dimension there is quality versus quantity. So think of this as like papers, which is the traditional way of thinking about it, although it's not great. But quantity number of papers. So how many papers you publish versus uh, how much progress each paper makes, right? And that's up to you to decide. And it's a hard decision. Some people like to perseverate on a paper for a long time and maybe collect multiple experiments and do multiple analyses and build like a big story in the guise of one paper. And other people like to cut it like salami. The metaphor is cutting your salami thin or slicing your meat thin or something. And that's a choice, and that's a hard. Everyone's different, but you just have. I guess my only point is consider this and do it deliberately. Another aspect of career design, I think, and maybe this is a general theme throughout my slides, is just think about what you're doing, just at a meta level. Like in this case, you're going to think about yourself as a scientist. Science is complicated. There's different topics. There's different skills. There's and people are different. And so part of designing your own uh, avatar, or I don't know what the metaphor is, like you get to choose who you want to be, and part of doing that is knowing what you're good at and developing that and lean in into that. So I'm just going to pick on Noah because he's the biggest human I can see right now. He leaned into data science, right, and developing all of these like it's a set of skills that is very useful to doing, say, neuroscience. And he did it. He developed it, and now that's his superpower. Great. Conversely, understand your flaws, like, and the action item from there is, well, maybe you have some flaws and you can spend time to remedy them, or you just know that they're your flaws and you patch them up in other ways. So you either, and it's a little cynical, do projects that don't really involve those flaws, or find collaborators and people to help you with parts that you can't do yourself. Right? There are like we there's actionable items here. We kind of touched on this, like the whole personal subjective aspect. Like you don't want to be doing a 10-year marathon if it's just pain the whole way. So as you learn about science, learn what you like to do and presumably do more of that because you're going to be happier and you're going to be more productive and so on. This one's important. Know what you don't know, which is kind of like understand your flaws, but a little, maybe perhaps less negative. So we have a simple 2x2 here. Let's just go through it. So the columns, there's things that you know and are good at, say, and there's things that you don't know or you're not good at. Those are the columns. The rows are this meta level. Like you know that, for example, you know certain things, and you can also know that you don't know certain things. So that's the first row. The second row is it's the tricky one. It's things that you don't know. Sorry, it's meta knowledge. So you don't know that you know certain things. That's a little funny, but that's imposter syndrome. And I think that's in the chat. So if you're super new to things and you're a little like anxious about your skill set, you might actually be really great at certain things, but you might be underestimating your abilities. So that would be this square where you don't actually know that you know these things. Like you're not giving yourself enough credit. And I guess imposter syndrome would kind of fit into that bucket where you're not confident in the knowledge that you actually have. The question was, do you have any advice for that? Um, I, I don't have any great advice. I guess I like to play it both ways. Like you don't want to be overconfident, and you also don't want to be underconfident. So I think the goal is getting data for yourself on where your skills actually lie. So testing yourself. So you can either test yourself like by yourself, like I don't know, I'm picking on coding. So if you're not sure whether you're a good coder of analyses, like you can test yourself, right? You can generate simulated data, you can run unit tests, you can replicate analyses you see in published papers, and if you're getting the right answer, then hopefully that builds your confidence. So that's within yourself. And then if you want to involve others, I don't know, you talk to people you trust, and they will hopefully give you an honest answer. Like, hey, am I doing this right? what do you think about this result? What do you think about, how I'm thinking about things? And they can bolster your confidence. Or conversely, like gently tell you like, no, 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 you need to like dig a little deeper. Anyway, and this last element, you don't know that you don't know certain things, and that's the worst bucket, right? So let's just pick an MRI. MRI is a complex topic. There's lots of physics specific details. There are data handling, pre-processing related details. There's all sorts of stuff, and it's a huge topic. Ideally, you're not like forgetting that there's a whole set of things that are important, but which you're not even aware of. That would be stuff in this bucket. So there's an arrow here labeled, you want to move from this bucket to this bucket. So you want to move from a state of ignorance about things you don't know to a state of awareness about the things you don't know. So that's figuring out, in a sense, what you need to learn, assuming that they're important. Like you need to first identify, here's a hole in my knowledge base. That's step one. And then step two is fill that hole. And then eventually, so yeah, filling that hole is moving to this bucket. So eventually you will know those things, and then you will know that you know those things. So there's like a progression here. Move, move. Okay. Other things in career design, deciding the flavor of research, like I am a blah, blah, blah researcher using blah, blah, blah techniques. That's like a typical way to describe yourself. And as I was saying, like that's up to you. Like you don't have to be any one thing. You get to choose who you want to be. And I think that's cool. And finally, and there's, as I said, there's a whole set of slides on thinking about collaborations and how to do that. I think it's really important. And so that's why I mention it as part of career design. And it does take time, right? If you're a first, second, third year grad student, you're not expected to have lots of collaborators or whatever. But like as you transition to become an advanced PhD student and postdoc, like I think all else being equal, it is good to have productive collaborations in place. All right, let me check the Slido. What are your thoughts on going deep versus going broad in terms of career focus? I actually need some clarification on that. Deep meaning uh, like studying one thing but well versus broad meaning studying many things. So if someone could clarify that, that would be helpful. All right, getting help. Again, pitch towards more trainee people, but the point of this slide is it's important and don't shy away from it, and it's going to help you in the long run. Furthermore, it's a skill. So how to get help? Let's see. Everyone you're surrounded with in a research capacity, and actually in your personal capacity, friends and family, but let's just focus on the science part of this. Everyone has the potential to help you. This could be your people in your lab, could be your PI, could be people you know from other labs, could be friends you made during grad school visits, could be anyone. It could also be random people, as I mentioned here. And I will touch on this when we talk about collaborations, but in general, scientists are friendly people, I think, on average. And and they like what they like. And so if you have a shared interest in some topic, they're probably going to be open to talking to you, and maybe they'll become your friend, and friends can help you. Now, I say it's a skill because part of getting help is at least having some knowledge base to stand on. So let me give you an example. What you don't want to do is, I'm sure some of you have seen emails like this, where someone asks like a question that's so like a question that's essentially an entire PhD thesis. Like you're not going to answer that question over email, right? Like, so basically like a naive question that's just like, can you help me analyze fMRI data? Like what? You can't, that's the non-starter. That's not even a question. Okay, so I'm not saying any of you did that, but it happens. So just knowing, you need to have some basic foundation. And it also extends, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, on coding, assuming I keep coming to coding because I assume that resonates with a lot of you. But I'm sure you've seen bug reports that are just like, hey, it crashed. Like that's not even a question. Or hey, it crashed, can you help me? I guess technically that's a question, but it's not really a question because there's not enough, context, obviously, or you need to know at least, what were you doing? What are you trying to do? What line of code are you talking about? What is your current assessment of the problem? Or like, be more specific. So yeah, okay. Getting help is not like send random emails to anyone you talk to, but thinking a little bit about your question. So yeah, know how to ask questions. And as a trainee, I think the goal here is you're in a part of your career where you have time and you're younger, so maybe you can learn stuff more easily. But the goal is to develop skills, right? And that means get capabilities that you yourself can then use to your own effect. So the metaphor here is you don't want someone to just give you the cooked fish. You want to learn how to fish so that you can go off and get really good at it and get all this fish. Um, so I think the default then is, yeah, you don't want someone to do it for you. You want someone to explain how to do it and explain why you're doing it, ideally, and how best to do it, which takes extra time, right? It'd be a lot easier, obviously, if someone comes in and like types furiously on your keyboard and fixes your IT problem. But it would be nice maybe if you understood what was happening, right? And that takes extra time and explanation. Okay, let me check the time here. Okay, let me go to the Slido. I'm trying to pace myself, but yeah, let me engage with the questions here. Those are big fish. Yeah, they're almost as big as the humans. Okay, do you think it's crucial to move universities for career progression? Oh, work life. Okay, I don't touch on work life issues at all in my little talk. Is it crucial? Well, I don't think there's much. It's a trade-off. Like all else being equal, yeah, if you have a great faculty job offer, the best thing for your career is do it. But for your personal life and sanity, it might not be great. Like, yeah, I don't know. There's a fundamental trade-off there. Now, certain departments or hiring committees can be nice on that. Like you bring up that issue and they could work with you, right? And like work that through. It's not guaranteed by no means. The phrase is often two-body problem. Um, yeah. So and obviously people make it work the other way also. So if you have constraints, either personal constraints or whatever, like it is possible to find a great fit. It gets harder, I think. Um, okay. Next, deep, be an expert in one thing, be familiar with a lot of things. Am I better off learning all of the methods or being really good at MEG? It's hard to say. So this is part of, I would say, the career. It's up to you. It's a stylistic choice, and there's people on both ends of the spectrum. Um, I'm probably on one far end of the spectrum where all I do is everything related to fMRI. So that would be deep, I guess. But certainly there's other scientists and researchers who use many methods and maybe aren't fully an expert in any one of them. But that's okay, right? Like both are good. Both are good if in the end you make progress on stuff, right? Like that's ultimately the thing that should decide. Okay, one more question, then I'll move on to slide deck. Different department of neuroscience, interested in doing postdoc. Advice on how to prepare myself for my training as a different department. Ooh, that's a hard one. Noah, you should actually speak to that.
Yeah.
Noah King. Okay, go ahead.
Whoever asked that, send me a direct message or come find me. I did my PhD in computer simulations of proteins, not neuroscience, and I found the transition pretty easy, but I'd be happy to talk to people about that.
Yeah, great. Noah's the expert there. I don't have much to say there. Let me go fast over this. The only point was, and yeah, okay, should you change your personality if you're thinking about being a career scientist? I mean, that might be hard. And I'm just listing here some like ideal characteristics to do good science. Let me just comment more on this last one, showmanship. And there's huge variation out there. And so I'm just putting this out there just for food for thought, essentially. People tell me, and I have seen on occasion, like one mode of being for trainees is to be Eeyore. So hopefully you know what Eeyore is. He is Winnie the Pooh character, where essentially he's always kind of depressed and doesn't think highly of himself and like it kind of mopes around. And so in science, what that amounts to is like the student or trainee is overly critical, like to the point of like they're not comfortable with any result they get. They're like, maybe it's not right, or I'm not sure, or how do you really know, or like maybe I should redo it, or So there's a balance, of course, right? Like you don't want to be too far on that because if you are, then you'll never publish anything, you'll never do anything formally in the scientific record, right? Um, so I don't want to say don't have any elements of that, but obviously too much of that is not great. So you have to find some balance for yourself is really what I'm saying. And there's the other extreme. So being a salesman, like promoting your science like it's the best thing ever. Okay, obviously you don't want to oversell, you don't want to say ridiculous things, but there's some balance between these two ends of the spectrum that you need to find. And this kind of goes towards more like when you present your research, when you write formally, like the readers of your work, they want to get excited. Like a reviewer of your paper, they're taking time out of, and you could say the system's broken, but they're volunteering their time currently, usually, to read your paper, and it could easily take 4 or 5 hours or more or less. And no one wants to read something boring or terrible, right? And so just how you write about your work, you want to excite, you want to motivate, you want to explain why you did your research, and like you don't have to oversell. You can mention limitations, of course, and just be honest about it. But ultimately, you're submitting a paper because presumably you find it of value. And so part of doing that effectively is to be a little bit on selling the work, explaining why it's important. And that's a very common pitfall for someone to write sort of objectively, here's what I did without really explaining why it matters. Like that's a common pitfall in science communication. Okay. I see some comments. I will get to them in a minute. I just want to make sure I can get to the collaboration stuff. Uh, yeah, let me skip that a bit. Okay, here's a funny slide. And I'm not really sure if there's major take-home points of this slide other than I think it's fun to think about. So as you know and more, you learn, you meet people, you see people give talks, you go to conferences. I think the cool thing is there's diversity out there, right? There's great strengths that, and different people have different strengths. That's kind of one of my points here. And you also see sometimes negative bits. So the negative is often hidden. So like if you have a friend group or like you attend a talk, you'll gossip amongst yourself. But it's not in science, it's not usually made public. So it's like behind the scenes stuff. But presumably all of us have some thoughts in our heads, when we see talks or read papers, we're either super positive, sometimes we're very negative, whatever. Um, and yeah, I'm not sure what let's focus on the positive bits. So on the positive side, this goes back to self-knowledge. Like think about what you're good at and like what your superpower is. And once you figure that out, like exploit it. Like lean in, do what you're good at. And there's plenty of wiggle room and flexibility in science such that like you can be a successful scientist and have a productive career even if you have very specific strengths. Any comments? Yeah, I see the Slido, but on this slide or things that come to mind based on this topic.
Kendrick, maybe you could say a little bit about how trainees might try to assess these in their possible mentors.
Oh, great question. the best, most accurate method is probably one that you already are thinking, which is well, you don't ask that person, you ask people around that person. So people in their lab or lab adjacent, so at the institution, but in a different lab, that's probably the most, that's, close enough to have a lot of information, but not close enough to be super biased. Um, yeah,
Well,
I don't know.
I'll throw
Go
out
ahead.
there, when I was in grad school, there was a postdoc that came and interviewed in our lab and wanted to talk to the undergrads in the lab. Because they felt that the undergrads wouldn't have any pressure to please the PI. And they specifically wanted to know if there was anything going on in the lab that was on the right side of the slide here. And at the time, I was very confused about it, but in retrospect, I think it was actually very clever, because as a grad student, you often don't want to say something about your PI that might get back to them. And undergrads just don't feel that way. Usually.
Yeah, great idea. I think there is one slight possible pitfall of that, which is the undergrad might not be deep enough in the
Yeah.
murk to really know, but obviously depends on the situation.
I'll counter that. I tend to ask the people who've stayed around the longest. Something's made them stay around the longest. Either they can put up with whatever's on the right-hand side, or that actually there is nothing on the right-hand side.
So,
Yeah, so harkening back to the very first white point I make, doing science is a very people-oriented thing. And yeah, it's rightly so, whoever brought it up. Your PI, if you're a trainee, is like the main, for better or worse, person that you're in orbit around. So it's really important um, to have a good relationship or a productive relationship at least with said person. All right, so I think we're doing pretty good on time. Thanks for comments and questions. Let me turn to the Slido. I have a couple of slides and collaborations, but there's a nice pause here, so I will let me go to the Slido. Any advice for when you are the first grad student in the lab? Yikes. Yeah, great opportunities and also very challenging. Yeah, so being the first grad student, I don't know. I don't have deep experience on this, but I will give you what comes to mind. Like the opportunities are great if you're independent and can work well with, okay, number one, you need to be able to work well with the PI because you might literally be the only other person. So hopefully you can have a good working relationship. And if you're independent and like to do things on your own and get stuff done and communicate it well and document it and build your lab website or whatever it is, how you establish the basic infrastructure for the lab, I mean, it's a great opportunity for all of that. And you'll learn a lot by doing it. So if you really want to learn things from the ground up and get your feet dirty and into, whatever specific methods that the lab is specializing in, like that's a great opportunity. But the pitfalls, goes without saying, is like the lab isn't super established yet. So I don't know, name recognition may be low. Um, Hopefully that doesn't sway, the paper submission process too much, but like obviously there's some risk of that. Um, and like if you're in a rush due to whatever reason, like you want to graduate in 4 years or whatever, like obviously it's not great for doing that because you may not have basic stuff in place like IRBs and the subject recruitment process or even computational infrastructure. Maybe that needs to get set up, servers and stuff like that.
we have a comment from the room.
Uh, just for the online audience or people in this room, I was the first grad student in a small lab. I moved to a lab of 3 people. So yeah, a lot of the things can be said that resonates with me, like you get to build things from the ground up, but also if the PI is more laid back and there's a lot of pressure on you to actually keep pushing on. Otherwise, you're seeing people from other labs going to conferences and stuff and you're chilling. And it's year 5 and you're like, oh, I need to wrap up things very, very quickly. So there's pros and cons to that, but it can be an interesting experience if you are someone who likes to read and think things by themselves and is not afraid to reach out to other people to learn new things. Then that's definitely for you. Avoid a crowded lab, I would say. There's too many opinions sometimes. I've seen that happening. Yeah, just personal experience. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear all of that, but I assume the people physically there heard it. But one thing you touched on, I think is important. I haven't touched on at all. It's, I guess, goes more into like student PI relationship or trainee PI relationship. The issue of, and people talk about this, like hands on, hands off. So both sides of that equation might have their preference. So does the student want to be independent and do things themselves, or does the student want more guidance? That's a choice, or that's like a quirk. Neither is good. They're just choices. And also on the PI side, is the PI one to be hands off, laid back, just kind of let the student lead, or does the PI really want to be heavily guiding and micromanaging potentially? So those are two, that's a knob or a switch for both sides. And I guess ideally the switches are in sync. And I guess try to figure that out before you join a lab. Okay, another question. Slow science versus fast science. Yeah, that's a toughie, right? So that's going back to quality versus quantity. So let's define slow science as high quality work, but very slow. Therefore, quantity is low. Versus fast science, which is churn out papers month after month, even if the quality is suspect. I guess most the way people talk about this is the tension is like, you know, publication metrics, publish or perish, that is pushing, incentivizing fast science, like just get papers out. That's, I don't know how to change that, but that's kind of how our field works. So what's the question? Let's see. Is it possible to do slow science? It's possible, but relative to fast science, harder, right? Because if you're, again, if you're judged based on sheer quantity, yeah, that's not great. Yeah, I don't have any, I don't know if anyone has smarter thoughts on this. Okay, one thought, and someone else chime in, please. You could do a hybrid approach, but this is more like go for the sure project as well as a longer term project. So kind of have two projects, right? Something that's more guaranteed, relatively fast to complete, and meanwhile you're working on some longer term, bigger ideas.
If you have experience, I guess that works. Experience. If you have experience, I guess for people trying starting out, it's really difficult to judge that.
Yeah, so Kendrick, if you can't hear, that's the comment is that works if you're experienced, but if you're starting out, that's really hard to judge. And I might add that at least advice I got when I was early in grad school was that grad school is not the best time to do your best work. It is a good time to learn the stuff and get to a postdoc. And so at least, you know, this is obviously going to vary a lot based on your lab and your personal style and what you'd like to do, but if you have a choice in grad school between something that may take you 8 or 9 years and something that's going to take you 4 years, there's an obvious advantage to you getting to a postdoc faster and working on the thing that you're more interested in that kind of environment.
Yeah, just to riff on that, agree, disagree. We're almost always underestimating the time taken for something. So you think it's going to take 2 years, it's going to take 5 years. You think it's going to take 6 years or 8 years, it'll never actually complete. Okay, let me move on to collaboration. Sorry, maybe I'll get to that question in a second. So I stuck this on to this existing slide deck, but it's its own topic, I think. So I'm going to define collaboration as working on some project, some scientific project, with someone other than yourself. That's a very broad definition. And so kind of like what we discussed, this obviously includes your PI if you're a postdoc or grad student. So that's at minimum a collaboration. And then often projects have other collaborators, often within the same lab. So a fellow grad student or a postdoc or RAs or whatever. The only thing I think this excludes would be like, hey, once you write your paper, send it to a friendly lab PI or something, and they read the paper and the review process. Like technically, yeah, the reviewers are kind of working on your project, right? They're giving you feedback and you're going to revise it, but yeah, let's exclude that for a minute. Okay, so collaboration is inevitable, maybe my point. And within the broad umbrella of collaboration, there's huge variance. That's kind of my main point here. It could be anywhere from you're merely a co-author. So for example, papers, two co-authors on a paper might not ever have even met each other, even Zoomed each other. I've been co-authors with other people that I don't even know who they are. That's possible and totally fine, right? It just depends on the project versus like what I might call a deep collaboration, like someone you talk to every day or every week for hours at end, like your hopefully your PI or people that you're working deeply with. So it spans a huge spectrum. Why would you want to collaborate? And so actually the mindset I had when I was designing the slide is that actually not like student and PI. I actually meant it more like someone else. So someone outside the lab, maybe someone at your institution, but not in your lab or elsewhere. That's kind of what I was thinking about. And so why do these come about? All sorts of reasons. You need help, often with a technical problem. You're delving into some topic that your lab doesn't have expertise in, and you just need some background knowledge or people to understand the field. You want to get into this new thing that your lab doesn't do, like some measurement technique or some way of analyzing data. This is actually more on the PI end. You have a bunch of data and you need people to analyze it. So under my broad definition, that's also collaboration, even though it's kind of top down. You just need advice on this type of science. Maybe there's a world expert who specializes in whatever, and you just need their ear. Maybe you need data. Maybe you have great data science skills, but like you don't have the right data. So you go out there fishing for data. Or you want to run a certain experiment and it's just part of a larger data collection project and you need someone to deliver the very best way to measure blah, blah, blah. So all of these are great reasons to pursue a collaboration. And as I already said, like it could be anything. Like it could be daily check-ins, it could be weekly check-ins, it could be once a year meetings. None of it, and I say this just as a descriptive, like it's not necessarily better to meet weekly versus daily versus yearly. Like once a year might be great, right? Like have a focused, here's where we're at. It could be super organic, like some collaborations happen without either party actually knowing it's a collaboration, versus the very formal end of things of like a PI writing in some other PI, hey, can you be responsible for this part of the project if it gets funded? So that's very formal. And the structure, it could be anything. PI can collaborate with another PI. PI can collaborate with a student. A student can collaborate with some other student. Student can collaborate with, postdocs. And the graph that you could draw here could be any shape, any size, any configuration, which is cool, right? Like I guess the theme here is it's up to you. You get to choose. You get to design your own fate. Okay. There's definitely benefits and there's definitely pitfalls. I will get to them, but let's start with the positive. Why are collaborations useful? Well, ideas are useful. Even if it's just a Zoom call or like an in-person meeting for an hour or two, that could be hugely impactful to your project, right? Someone clues you into some topic that you didn't even consider, or points out some issue that, had you not known about this issue would cause headache 2 months down the road in the paper review process, or like gives you an idea of like, oh, just analyze it this way and it'll solve this issue. Like ideas in and of themselves, even if it's just words, right? Ideas are really impactful. It could also involve code, data, experiments, right? Like more practical, concrete things. But I guess the theme here is like just feedback is really important and useful. As a trainee, part of collaborating is learning stuff, right? It actually, you could think of it as a side benefit. Like someone's going to help you with X. You might also learn about X and doing it. And in the future, you will have that skill. It can increase your output as a scientist, papers. I think in the long term, and this is maybe for people who do a lot of collaborations, and I guess I'm one of those people, it kind of changes the type of research you pitch yourself as. Like through your collaborations, you actually have multiple skill sets. if you sustain these collaborations and have a working relationship with certain people. And lastly, but actually perhaps most very importantly, is the networking benefits. And what I mean by that is this goes all the way back to the first theme that I said, people, right? Science as an endeavor is about people. And the more, and it's a little cynical, but the more friends, more science friends you have, the better. And if you pursue collaborations and they work well, they presumably are your friends. Like it'd be a little weird to have a productive collaboration with someone that's your enemy, but but presumably they're your friend, and that's great because then they know you, they can introduce you to other friends, you'll get invited to talks or visits, you will build your network, you'll get known in the field, and so on. So it's a little cynical to think about it that way, but this is a side effect of pursuing and executing collaborations. And in the bigger picture of science career, this is very valuable to have. Okay. As I said, collaborations can come about for many reasons. I think it's just like dating in many ways, right? You need the right fit. You need like something you both like topic, or something that one person has that the other person doesn't have, like some exchange here. And there's also this whole chemistry part. So here, obviously, I mean like personality chemistry. Is it fun to talk to this person for whatever reason, or is it not fun, or do you have similar sense of humor? Like these are very people-oriented things, and like obviously has nothing really to do about the science we're doing, but it's all about the people doing the science and whether they can communicate, whether they can get along, whether they have fun doing it. Collaborations can arise right now at NeuroHackademy. It can happen. You could find someone with great mutual interests, and you could keep that going after the next week or 2 weeks. Who knows? Conversations, conferences, summer schools, you just talk to people and just kind of talk about science, and they will just happen. Someone could tell you like, hey, I'm interested in doing this, but I need someone who knows X and such. So people who know people, they can be helpful. They can put you in touch. In fact, I do a lot of that. I'm like the matchmaker often in projects. If you have like a science friend, like even if you're not currently collaborators, a year from now you might be, right? You get into a new topic, you keep up with this person, and like it may, you don't have to force a collaboration. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't, and it just just by continuing to know someone, it may happen in the future. And this last one, I want to emphasize, like this is totally fine. Maybe feels a little awkward or anxious, especially if you're a PhD student or someone new to the field, of just like emailing someone you've never met, you don't even know who they are or what even they look like. And there's a chance you may not get a response. Totally fine. Like, I don't know, put it at 50-50. So, people are swamped with email, or they're too busy, or your email goes to spam. In fact, a lot of my emails go to spam. So I don't feel bad if I don't get a response. But it's totally fine. Like there's no harm to this other than the 10 minutes it takes you to write a reasonable email. So yeah, you could email someone saying like, hey, I'm interested in this topic, or I liked your paper, or I'd be curious to get your feedback on some stuff I'm doing. Like, however you want to pitch it, like, doesn't hurt and can only help.
I'll just interrupt here and say that I got my very first postdoc by cold calling a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and I would say that every single one of these I've got a collaboration that started this way. But if you're looking at that cold call thing and thinking that'll never work, it does work. It can.
Of course, the caveat here is it sort of depends on what you say, right? A one-line sentence that's just like not written well and makes no sense, like versus a thoughtful, earnest, and honest email, right? So that's a whole separate discussion. And it doesn't have to be a cold call. If you know someone and like they're in the field, like that can obviously help your case, and they can actually help you translate your ideas or concerns to this other person. Okay, disadvantages. So that was all like very positive, and there are many disadvantages, and I list them here not because I'm dissuading you from doing it, but for the practical outcome of just being aware of these things as you pursue it. So one big class is just people problems. And probably some of you have already seen some of this or experienced some of it, unfortunately. Authorship issues, very common. Arguably, involving too many people can reduce the overall efficacy of each individual person. For example, like a 10-person Zoom call, like that's very hard to have an actual discussion. And Zoom is great, of course, you can do things at a distance, but most people probably agree it's not as effective as being there in the room, but obviously that's travel costs. But anyway, too many people can actually reduce progress. There might be fundamental disagreements about science. I think this is pretty rare. Um, if anything, if there are fundamental disagreements between two people, they probably are not even going to be talking at length, right? So I think it's rare for that reason alone, but it's possible. This one's a big one to think about, personality conflicts. This happens of all different styles. It could be two PIs conflicting or a PI and the student. It could be all sorts of things. Priority mismatches. So this one's also a big one. Like usually projects are like they have a main lead and someone who's assisting. So if the main lead is really invested in a project and the other person is busy, they have differing priorities, right? And that can cause some conflicts. And there's risks once you allow part of your project to be taken over or responsible by someone else, that there's some risk that they may, drop the ball. So those are people problems. There's also just general problems of overhead. So it takes time and energy to collaborate. So this goes back to effort versus payoff. So thinking about a collaboration, you apply the effort versus payoff curve. Like that should be the first thought in your mind. Like, is this actually going to pan out? Will this person have enough time? Are they going to be is it going to be a productive collaboration? It may not be worth the time and energy, of course, or it could be, right? This is just something to consider. Another cost, I think, is, and this one's a hard one, communicating complex scientific data or analysis ideas or figures. Like it's very hard to do good communication. So that both takes time, but also it may not be as accurate as keeping it to a tight group, right? So it's like, and okay, I experience this a lot where, I don't know, people ask me to advice on their analysis or something. It requires like half an hour, 45 minutes even to really understand what an analysis was, right? And that takes, and unless you are willing to have the time to exert that much time, I can't actually give good advice, right? If I only know the skeleton of what you're kind of doing. I'll do my best. I will kind of guess and fill in the blanks of like, okay, you can probably look at this, but I actually need that 45 minutes of explanation to really get all the details, because in science, the details matter. And so the risk is, if push comes to shove and time is limited and people lose interest or are busy, like you lose the details and like, stuff gets lost. Okay. So there are definitely disadvantages, but there are solutions. So tips, how best to avoid these problems. Be wary of entering into collaborations. Again, the metaphor of dating. Be wary of who you date and kind of figure out who this person is. You start slowly. I already mentioned, constantly think about like, is this a useful use of your time and their time? Be explicit about expectations. And to be even more specific, and this one's a little, I think this doesn't happen a lot, but I think it should happen more often, like sketch out the authorship. So the pitfall here is like, oh, two people or two labs start collaborating, and there's like 5 people involved, and like people are doing all sorts of things, and it's a complex. And then once the day comes for the paper to be written, there's all sorts of differing expectations on like who's the last author, who's the first author, who's even the author. I've seen cases of like it's not even clear yet if such and such is an author, and that's not a great situation. So the remedy is like before time is spent, like sketch it out. It doesn't have to be like final, but kind of a tentative proposal of what is even in store. Keeping your collaborators informed, perhaps a little obvious. And this just goes to being explicit. So if you start feeling, you don't have time or you're losing interest, just like sooner the better. Just let the other person know. All right, this last one, I think is this my last slide for collaborations? Yeah. So these are kind of funny, so I think they're easy to digest. So this is more on the negative side. So if you collaborate and it blows up, that's not a great idea. So don't burn your bridges with, say, important people. Pitfalls, as I already mentioned, authorship dramas are very typical and not a happy situation. This one's very typical. If it's a like highly collaborative project and like everyone's helping, and if there's no actual lead, what can happen is like, people get busy, people graduate, stuff takes longer, and like no one wants to finish it, and that's terrible. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm a strong believer in like there being a clear leader of a project, the first author usually. Common pitfalls, yeah, time sinks, things take longer than you expect. People get busy, people are more busy than you expect, or they underestimate their own busyness. Um, yeah, so on and so forth. Uh, let's see. This one's a good one, and it happens. It's very typical. Like, I think both people have the right intentions, but this is a pitfall. So, one group collaborates with another group. There was a lot of activity early on, and then the original group goes back and does a lot of work, and like 6 months go by, right? And progress is made. They're working hard, but the other group is completely out of the loop. And then all of a sudden it's time to like submit for a conference, or people are in a rush to publish. So someone emails at the last minute saying like, hey, can we get your feedback? We want to submit this tomorrow. And that's just not a great situation because everyone's busy. They have 10 other projects or 5 other projects, and demanding that someone drop everything to do this thing is not a great outcome. So this is just a failure of like communication and time management. Like just give people heads up, give people at least a week to find an hour to do something. Okay. Yeah, so I sped a little bit, but I think that's the bulk of what I wanted to get across. So here's my kind of, after I monologued at you for over an hour, here's my bottom line for I think what I'm trying to say today. People are important. People are key to this whole process of being an academic scientist, specifically thinking about how your work is landing on others and actually getting honest feedback about that and building up a friend network. Important. Being very deliberate in how you manage your time, what you spend your time on, identifying your own strengths and weaknesses. That's kind of something I talked about. And being aware of effort versus payoff. And then finally, I think this is the best way to say it. It's very powerful and flexible. It's a tool in the end, right? You're doing this to help presumably all the parties who are collaborating, so everyone gets something out of it. Of course, there are pitfalls, so be aware of how you go about doing it. That's all I had. I guess I have 5 minutes, and so can transition to the Slido, unless there's verbal questions, or I guess Slido is verbal.
All pages, new questions, but they're kind of quiet in the room. If anyone has a question, you raise your hand. They're apparently just submitting on your Slido.
Yeah, great. Great on using the Slido. This is exactly what it's for. Okay, in no particular order, how do I start a collaboration? Yeah, even if you haven't published anything, that doesn't preclude starting a collaboration. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to say it's, collaborations are, 100% hit rate. Like if there's someone you want to collaborate with, there's no guarantee it'll work. So I don't want to say that, but you don't need to have published anything. You just need, I don't know, motivation, ideas. In fact, one possible collaboration, okay, if you know nothing, then I'm going to say, yeah, you can't collaborate. But if you want to learn something, you just got to find someone who's willing to help you and teach you. And that's a collaboration, right? You don't have to have completed something from start to finish yet in order to design that type of collaboration. Let's see. Cold calling. I'm a postdoc starting a research position and got that position just by emailing and asking. Yeah. Wait, I think for the rough, I'm going to guess proportion of like position, like jobs or, postdoc jobs gotten via word of mouth. So someone knows someone who knows someone versus just apply to some posted job position versus someone emailing directly. I don't know. I have huge error bars in this, but one third, one third, one third. So word of mouth obviously is effective one third of the time, let's say. Just a formal application to some online application, a third of the time it happens. I've accepted people through that. And then the last third is just a random email, even if there's no job ad. Faculty, people are in different stages of grants and funding, or maybe so there doesn't have to be an advertised position. And so just like cold called email can work. And in fact, my most recent postdoc, it was that. I had no job ad. I wasn't even looking for anyone, but it kind of made sense. Would like to hear more on dealing with big egos in academia. Hmm. I guess what more specifically? Like the typical example of big egos is like, some hotshot old person who just dominates the room. But there's not much to be done about that, right? So I'm a little confused by the question dealing with, like, unless they like take it out of unless they make it their job to make your life hell or something, which is pretty rare. Uh, so anyway, a little more clarity on that question, I guess, would be helpful. Um, I am the first grad student in Advisor's Lab. I have not worked on any collaborations with my advisor. What? Or do you mean with someone else other than your advisor? Okay, I'm going to read the question as, hey, I've been sort of confined to the lab sphere and haven't really exited the lab sphere yet, and you're in your 4th year, let's say, as a grad student. So again, caveat, like many styles work, that situation isn't necessarily a bad red flag. Like it could work, but I will also say it would be all else being equal nice to exit the sphere and either just, and it could be anything. It could just be from like just chat and like learn about other ways of thinking about the topic. It doesn't have to be a full-on collaboration. And it could also be a full collaboration on an actual project that eventually leads to a publication. Is this something you should bring up with your PI? If they're receptive, sure. I mean, unless talking to your PI is like a scary thing, sure, why not bring it up? And maybe they have friends, collaborator friends or colleague friends that they can put you in touch with. And if so, great. And if not, that's not a deal breaker. You can go make your own friends. Can we make a resources channel for folks to share tips? Sure. I mean, we're on this Slack channel, so you could just post it here and hashtag academic science. And what is your opinion on doing a postdoc if you don't want to be a PI? That I think people will have lots of different opinions. My take is like it's fine. Like even if you know you don't want to try the academic job market for faculty jobs, I think it's okay to do a postdoc. I mean, you can think of it as a job. It's a salary. You get to do fun stuff. Many people say being a postdoc is much more fun than being a grad student, right? Because you've exited learning phase and class phase and writing PhD thesis phase, and now you're just like a researcher. And on the other side of things, like you don't have to manage people, write grants, like the PI type of stuff. And so some people say it's a very happy place to be in. Yeah, in general, like obviously your own situation is unique and whatever, but so yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea to do it.
I think
Yep.
we're about to the end of the session. If there was another question you wanted to answer, go ahead, but I'm
Let
just
me just scan it. How much do institution names matter in post-grad school and industry? Post-grad school institution names. It matters to some extent, yes. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. Okay, but yeah, I understand you guys are on a time schedule, so I will stop here.
So I'll encourage everyone to continue this discussion in the, I believe we set up a K Academic Science channel. So if you have other thoughts or you want to talk about this further, I'm sure Kendrick can check on that channel and answer questions. But let's thank Kendrick for this talk.